which is not the first time Mr. Schiff has put words into transcripts that did not exist.
Adam Schiff meltdown when Trump's attorney used Schiff's own words against him right in front of the entire Senate. This was a complete demolition job.
Thank you, Mr. Chief Justice, members of the Senate, Leader McConnell, Democratic Leader Schumer. It's also my privilege to represent the President of the United States before this chamber. Senator Schumer said earlier today that the eyes of the founders are on these proceedings. Indeed, that's true. But it is the heart of the Constitution that governs these proceedings. And what we just heard from Manager Schiff, courts have no role, privileges don't apply, what happened in the past, we should just ignore. In fact, Manager Schiff just said, try to summarize my colleague's defense of the president. He said, not in those words, of course, which is not the first time Mr. Schiff has put words into transcripts that did not exist. Mr. Schiff also talked about a trifecta. I'll give you a trifecta. During the proceedings that took place before the Judiciary Committee, the president was denied the right to cross-examine witnesses. The president was denied the right to access evidence. And the president was denied the right to have counsel present at hearings. That's a trifecta. A trifecta that violates the Constitution of the United States. Mr. Schiff did say the courts really don't have a role in this. Executive privilege, why would that matter? It matters because it's based in the Constitution of the United States. One manager said that it is you that are on trial, the Senate. He also said that, and others did, that you're not capable of abiding by your oath. And then we had the invocation of the ghost of the Mueller report. I know something about that report. It came up empty on the issue of collusion with Russia. There was no obstruction. In fact, the Mueller report, to the contrary of what these managers say today, came to the exact opposite conclusions of what they say. Let me quote from the House impeachment report at page 16. Although President Trump has in times invoked the notion of due process, an impeachment trial, an impeachment inquiry is not a criminal trial and should not be confused with it. Believe me, what has taken place in these proceedings is not to be confused with due process. Because due process demands, and the Constitution requires, that fundamental fairness and due process, we're hearing a lot about due process is designed to protect the person accused. When the Russia investigation failed, it devolved into the Ukraine. A quid pro quo. When that didn't prove out, it was then bribery or maybe extortion, or somebody said, one of the members or the members of the House said treason. But instead we get two articles of impeachment. Two articles of impeachment that have a vague allegation about a non-crime allegation of abuse of power and obstruction of Congress. Managers, right here, before you today, who have said that executive privilege and constitutional privileges have no place in these proceedings. On June 28, 2012, Attorney General Eric Holder became the first United States Attorney General to be held in both civil and criminal contempt. Why? Because President Obama asserted executive privilege. With respect to the Holder contempt proceedings, Mr. Manager Schiff wrote, the White House assertion of privilege is backed by decades of precedent that has recognized the need for the President and his senior advisors to receive candid advice and information from their top aides. Indeed, that's correct. Not because Manager Schiff said it, but because the Constitution requires it. Mr. Manager Nadler said that the effort to hold Eric Holder, Attorney General Holder, in contempt for refusing to comply with various subpoenas was, quote, politically motivated, and Speaker Pelosi called the Holder matter, and I quote, a little more than a witch hunt. What are we dealing with here? Why are we here? Are we here because of a phone call? Or are we here before this great body because since the president was sworn into office, there was a desire to see him removed? I remember in the Mueller report, there were discussions about, insurance policies. The insurance policy didn't work out so well. So then we moved to other investigations. I guess you would call it reinsurance or an umbrella policy. And that didn't work out so well. And here we are today. Manager Schiff quoted the Supreme Court, and I'd like to make reference to the Supreme Court as well. It was then Justice Rehnquist, later to be Chief Justice Rehnquist, who wrote for the majority in United States versus Russell in 1973. These are the words. We may someday be presented with a situation in which the conduct of law enforcement agents is so outrageous that due process principles would absolutely bar the government from invoking judicial process to obtain a conviction. That day is today. That day was a year ago. That day was in July when Special Counsel Mueller testified. I am not today going to take the time to review, and I will do it later, the pattern and practices of irregularities that have gone on in these investigations from the outset. But to say that the courts have no role, the rush to impeachment, to not wait for a decision from a court on an issue as important as executive privilege, as if executive privilege hasn't been utilized by presidents since our founding. This is not some new concept. We don't waive executive privilege, and there's a reason we keep executive privilege, and we assert it when necessary. And that is to protect the Constitution and the separation of powers. The president's opponents, in their rush to impeach, have refused to wait for complete judicial review. That was their choice. Speaker Pelosi clearly expressed her impatience and contempt for judicial proceedings when she said, "We cannot be at the mercy of the courts." Think about that for a moment. We cannot be at the mercy of the courts. So take Article 3 of the United States Constitution, remove it. We're acting as if the courts are an improper venue to determine constitutional issues of this magnitude. That is why we have courts. That is why we have a federal judiciary. It was interesting when Professor Turley testified before the House Judiciary Committee in front of Mr. Nadler's committee. He said, we have 3 branches of government, not 2. If you impeach a president, if you make a high crime and misdemeanor out of going to courts and abuse of power, it's your abuse of power. You know, it's more than that. A lot more than that. There's a lot more than an abuse of power if you say the courts don't apply. Constitutional principles don't apply. Let's start with a clean slate as if nothing happened. A lot has happened. As we proceed in the days ahead, we will lay out our case. We're going to put forward to the American people, but more important, for the Constitution's sake, what's taken place here. But this idea that we should ignore what has taken place over the last 3 years is outrageous. We believe that what Senator McConnell has put forward provides due process, allows the proceedings to move forward in an orderly fashion. 33 days. 33 days they held on to those impeachment articles. 33 days. It was such a rush of national security to impeach this president before Christmas that they then held him for 33 days. To do what? To act as if they negotiate, the House of Representatives should negotiate the rules of the United States Senate. They didn't hide this. This was the express purpose. This was the reason they did it. We're prepared to proceed. Majority Leader, Democratic Majority Leader, we're prepared to proceed. In our view,
before we even get into what was said here, people need to remember the atmosphere surrounding Trump's first impeachment trial. Democrats and the media had spent years trying to convince the country that Donald Trump was some kind of foreign asset, some kind of criminal mastermind working with Russia. They promised the Mueller investigation would be the end of him. Night after night on cable television, Americans were told that bombshell evidence was right around the corner. And then what happened? The entire collusion narrative collapsed. That's what made this moment so important, because Trump's attorney walked into the Senate chamber and reminded everybody watching exactly how Democrats kept moving the goalposts every single time one accusation failed. First, it was Russia collusion, then obstruction, then Ukraine, then quid pro quo, then bribery, then extortion. At one point, Democrats were even throwing around the word treason like it was nothing. It became obvious to millions of Americans that impeachment was not about protecting the Constitution. It was about finding literally anything they could use to damage Trump politically before the next election. And the attorney came out swinging immediately. The second he called out Adam Schiff for putting words into transcripts that didn't exist, you could feel the tension in the room, because that accusation hit directly at Schiff's credibility. People forget Schiff had already damaged his reputation with that infamous parody version of Trump's Ukraine phone call, where he dramatically inserted language the president never actually said. Republicans were furious about it because they believed Schiff was deliberately misleading the public while pretending to present factual evidence. So when Trump's attorney reminded the Senate about that history, it landed hard. Then came the constitutional argument, and honestly, this was one of the strongest parts of the entire defense. The attorney laid out what he called the trifecta of denied rights: no cross-examination, no full access to evidence, no ability for White House counsel to properly participate during key proceedings. Whether someone loved Trump or hated him, those arguments resonated with a lot of Americans because due process is supposed to matter no matter who the accused person is. And that was the bigger Republican argument throughout the impeachment trial. Democrats kept saying, nobody is above the law, but Republicans responded by saying, the Constitution still applies even when you dislike the president. That became a central dividing line in the country. The attorney also hammered Democrats over executive privilege, and this is where the hypocrisy accusations really exploded, because he brought up Eric Holder and the Obama administration. Suddenly, Democrats who were acting like executive privilege was some outrageous abuse of power had no problem defending it when Barack Obama asserted it during the Fast and Furious scandal. That comparison was devastating politically because it exposed the double standard Republicans had been talking about for years. When Obama invoked executive privilege, Democrats said it was necessary to protect presidential communications. When Trump invoked executive privilege, suddenly Democrats acted like constitutional protections were some kind of obstruction conspiracy. Trump's attorney wasn't just defending the president in that moment. He was accusing Democrats of applying one set of rules to Republicans and another set to themselves. And honestly, that argument connected with a lot of independent voters at the time. The attorney also pushed back aggressively against the idea that the Senate itself was somehow on trial, which was rhetoric Democrats kept using during the impeachment proceedings. Republicans saw that language as emotional manipulation. They believed Democrats were trying to shame senators into voting for removal instead of actually proving a clear criminal offense. That's another major point people forget about this impeachment. Trump was not charged with a traditional crime. The articles focused on abuse of power and obstruction of Congress, which Republicans argued were vague political accusations rather than clearly defined criminal conduct. Trump's legal team leaned into that argument hard because they knew many Americans were uncomfortable removing a sitting president over broad subjective standards. And politically, Democrats may have underestimated how exhausted the country was by this point. For years, Americans had heard non-stop investigations, non-stop leaks, non-stop impeachment talk, non-stop predictions that Trump was finished. But every single time, the media hype seemed bigger than the final result. By the time this Senate trial happened, a lot of voters had simply stopped believing the dramatic rhetoric coming from Trump's opponents. That's why moments like this mattered so much. Trump's attorney wasn't speaking like some calm legal scholar giving a technical lecture. He was speaking directly to public frustration. He framed Democrats as obsessed, partisan, and willing to bend constitutional standards just to get Trump. Whether people agreed or not, it was an emotionally effective argument. And here's the reality Democrats hated hearing at the time. Every failed impeachment push, every overhyped media prediction, every dramatic accusation that collapsed under scrutiny ended up strengthening Trump politically with his base. Republicans rallied around him even harder because they genuinely believed the establishment was trying to overturn the 2016 election through endless investigations. That perception became one of the defining political narratives of the Trump era. This clip captures that perfectly because the attorney didn't merely defend Trump. He went on offense. He accused Schiff and the impeachment managers of hypocrisy, constitutional inconsistency, political bias, and selective outrage. And in front of the Senate, he used Democrats' own past statements against them. That's what made this exchange so memorable. Because regardless of where someone stood politically, this was not some timid legal defense. It was a full counterattack against the entire impeachment narrative Democrats had spent years building. And looking back now, it's impossible to ignore how much this trial deepened the divide in America. One side believed Trump represented a dangerous abuse of presidential power. The other believed Democrats were weaponizing impeachment because they could not accept Trump's presidency from day one. That divide never really disappeared. If anything, it only grew stronger in the years that followed. But moments like this helped define why Trump's supporters stayed fiercely loyal to him through scandal after scandal. They saw exchanges like this and believed Trump was fighting not just Democrats, but an entire political and media establishment that they felt played by completely different rules depending on who held power. And when Trump's attorney stood there dismantling Schiff's arguments piece by piece, millions of conservatives watching at home felt like somebody was finally saying exactly what they had been thinking for years. If you enjoyed this breakdown, hit like, subscribe, and drop your thoughts in the comments. Was Trump's legal team exposing hypocrisy, or were Democrats justified in pushing impeachment? Let me know what you think.